We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Beis Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 92b. The Gemara is continuing to discuss whether a worker, when he eats while he is working, is that considered to be Mishalohu Ochel? That's essentially a part of his wages. Or do we say Mishal Shamayim? It's like a matan, it's like a gift to him from the Torah. And the Gemara is in the middle of bringing a proof from a Mishnah in Meisers. The Mishnah in Meisers is talking about a worker who was hired to dry figs. And the Mishnah says, Hareza Ochel, he's allowed to eat from those figs. Upater min ha-meiser, and he's exempt, he doesn't have to separate meiser. And Rashi explains, Hareza Ochel upater, he can eat from the figs, and he's pater from meiser. Dekevan de umdos liktzos, because since they still have to be dried, lo nigmara malachtan, you don't have a gemar malacha yet for meiser. As we said when we learned the Mishnah regarding this, when it comes to produce, to food that is already detached from the ground, so then the worker is allowed to take specifically when there's no gemar malacha. Once there is a gemar malacha for meiser, that's when it becomes problematic. So that's why the Mishnah over here is saying he's allowed to eat, and it's exempt from meiser. And the Mishnah continues, Al menasha ochel ani uveni. Let's say he makes a condition, and he says, I'm being hired on the condition that I can give myself food and also my son. O sheyochel b'ni b'schari, or he says that I want my son to eat, and that's going to be part of my wages. So in that situation, hu ochel upater, he can eat, and again, he'll be exempt from meiser. Uveno ochel v'chai, but his son, when he eats, he's going to be chayiv, he's going to be obligated to separate meiser. And Rashi explains, Ani uveni she'eino niskar lebal habayis. In other words, he says that my son who is not hired out to the bal habayis, I want to make a condition that he's allowed to eat. Or he has a condition that my son should eat my wages, shekitzatz tali, meaning what was apportioned to me, those wages that are apportioned to me, my son should be able to eat. So hu ochelu pater. So then he can eat, and he's pater. Torah zichsalo keleket shichopei. The point is, the Torah essentially allows him to have this. It's the same thing as leket shich and pei, which are left for the poor. Those are shepeturim min ha-meiser, just like those are exempt from meiser. So also the food he eats as a laborer is exempt from meiser. However, uveno ochel v'chayiv. However, when his son eats, he's going to be obligated by meiser. He's obligated in meiser. Dahavelei kilokeach mekach. It's similar, since in this case it was stipulated as part of the wages. It's no different than purchasing shelo nigmar malachto. Even when you purchase food where there was no gemar malacha, but when we're talking about a purchase, when we're talking about buying, so in such a situation the person is obligated in meiser, and that's true over here as well. And so the Gemara continues, V'yamrit mishalohu ochel. If you say that when a worker eats food while he's working, that's considered mishalo, that's part of his wages. So benoah my chayiv. So then why is the son chayiv if those wages essentially are going to his son? As Rashi says, V'yamrit mishalohu ochel. If you're going to say that he eats mishalo usecharuhu, and it's considered to be his wages, meaning even that food that he's eating is considered to be his wages. V'yafilu hachi patri rachmane. Nevertheless, the Torah says he's pater from meiser mikanavshecha. We learn from the word kanavshecha to darshin alei manavshecha ochelu pater afpoel ochelu pater, that we darshan just like navshecha, just like you're pater in this situation, meaning in a situation where there's no gemar malacha, so too the worker is pater in this situation. He can eat and he's pater in terms of meiser. So if that's the case, benoah my chayiv. So why is the son chayiv? Ha bischar aviv hu ochel kaviv. What's really happening over here is that the father is saying that part of my wages are that my son is going to eat, and when the father himself eats, that's part of his wages, and he's exempt from meiser. So why, when the son eats, is there an obligation in meiser? This is therefore a question according to the opinion that would hold mishalohu ochel. And the Gemara answers, Amar Ravina says, Mishum demichzi kemekach. The reason over here why the son is obligated in meiser is really just that it looks like a mekach. Really, it's true. Technically speaking, mishalohu ochel, when the worker is eating, that's really part of his wages. And if he makes a stipulation that part of his wages is that his son eats, it should be the same thing. But over here, it looks like a mekach. And Rashi explains, Mishum demichzi ki mekach, it looks like a mekach, hoel ve'isni. The point is, because he made it as a condition, he set it up ahead of time with the employer in that fashion, that looks just like a purchase. Aval achila didei, but when he's eating, de'eno b'tanai, there is no condition with the employer. That's something that he gets from the Torah. Avagav devischaru, even though that's considered part of his wages, lo damya lemekach, since it wasn't part of the conditions that he made with the employer, it's not similar to a mekach, it's not similar to a purchase. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here the following proof. This is from a Mishnah coming up. Hasocher es hapoel, if somebody hires a worker, lasos bineta revoy shalo, and the worker is working, but the fruits are fourth-year fruits. Now, when you're working with fourth-year produce, the halach is that fourth-year produce cannot be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. So now the worker's not able to eat this produce. Hareelu lo yochlu, so they shouldn't eat the produce. V'im lo hodiam, now if he didn't let the workers know, the workers thought it's like a regular situation where they're allowed to eat, and now they find out after the fact fact they're not allowed to eat, so then he really owes them. So poda umachilan. So he has to redeem that neta ravoy. You can redeem it onto money and then eat it outside of Yerushalayim, and then he can give it to them that they can eat it. And so the Gemara says, V'yamrin mishel shamayim hu ochel. Now, if you say that a worker is eating mishel shamayim, so amai podu machilan, why does he redeem it and he has to feed them? Isura lo zachilu rachmana. Certainly the Torah doesn't say, the Torah is not going to gift the worker something that's an isser, something that's a prohibition, so the worker is totally not entitled. Why is the owner responsible to redeem it and let them eat? And the Gemara says to that, Hasam over there, Mishum de Mechzi, Mekach Tos. The reason why the owner has to do that is because otherwise it looks like a Mekach Tos, meaning to say they thought that they were working in a field where they can eat, and suddenly they're told they're not able to eat. That's basically a Mekach Tos. They were hired under false pretenses, and that's why he needs to redeem it in order to allow them to be able to eat. And Rashi explains, Harayelu lo yochlu, the workers are not allowed to eat neta ravoy, the boy choma, because it requires the wall, talking about the wall of Yerushalayim, the gamar kodesh mi meiser, we learn out, Gzer Shavar from Meiser Sheni, and neta ravoy is treated the same as Meiser Sheni, uvitchila al menaskei niskaru lo, and so originally when they're hired, that's basically the understanding, that's the condition, that they're not going to be able to eat because it's neta ravoy. However, vim lo hodion, if he didn't let them know that it was neta ravoy, mitchila, he didn't let them know at the outset, lasos imo beneta ravoy, they didn't know that they were working with him in Neter Avoy, so then he has to redeem it and feed it to them, because otherwise, as the Gemara says, it looks like a mistaken purchase. They would have never agreed to be hired had he let them know, and so therefore, again, in this case, he has to redeem it to allow them to eat. And the Gemara continues, well, let's look at the end of that upcoming Mishnah, Nisbarsu Egulav Nispatchu Chaviosav. Let's say the Egulav are the pressed figs, they're pressed into like a circle and that comes apart, or let's say the barrels which were sealed, they become open and they need to be resealed. So the halacha over there is Harei Elu lo yochlu, the workers are not allowed to eat if they're putting together the figs again, if they're resealing the barrels, they're not allowed to eat. The reason for that is there already was a gemar malacha in terms of meiser, so the workers are not entitled. V'im lo hodian, and again, if he didn't let them know, if they didn't realize that they were resealing or that they were re-putting together, repressing the figs, meaning they thought already that there was no gemar malacha, they didn't realize that there was a gemar malacha and then something fell apart, so they didn't realize that, so then ma'asru ma'chilan, so then he has to take off the meiser and then feed it to them, then they're allowed to eat. Again, the same basic idea. And the Gemara asks the same question, V'yamrin mishel shamayim hu ochel. Now, if you're going to say that they're eating mishel shamayim, amay ma'asru ma'chilan, why is it that he has to take off meiser and feed it to them and let them eat? Again, isura lo zachilu rachmana, this is something that is isser, it's prohibited. The Torah never gave it to them, they don't have a right, so why is it that he has to do that? Now, if you're going to say the same answer, hachanami here also, mishum de because it looks like a mekach, meaning they didn't realize what was going on over here. They never would have agreed to be hired had they known that you had a situation of a gemar malacha already and that they couldn't eat. You'll give the same answer. So the Gemara says to that, B'shlama nisparsu egulav. I understand in the case where the pressed figs come apart, so they don't realize what's going on. Michsi k'mekach, it looks like a mekach. Ela nispatchu chaviosa, but when you're talking about the barrels being opened, so at the point in time already it's in the barrels, it's obvious it's a gemar malacha, whether they are opened or not. My mekach tos iko, what is the mekach tos? Meida yoda de itvaluhu lemeiser. They certainly know that it's tevel, meaning to say that there's an obligation of meiser in this situation. And Rashi explains nisparsu igulav, again the pressed figs, they're pressed into a circle that comes apart. Kitzios shedarsan bigulan. This is talking again about the dried figs, and they're pressed into these circular cakes. V'nigmru malachton lemeiser. And so the gemar malacha is over, meaning to say all of the work is over in terms of the issue of meiser. They're obligated in meiser at this point in time. Technically speaking, the workers cannot eat. V'naflu, but then they fall. V'nisparsu, falls apart. V'tzarach lachzor ladarsan, you have to do it again. You have to press them again. So harei elu lo yochlu, so they're not allowed to eat. Dein poel ochel bedavar shenigmar malachto lemeiser. Again, as we said, when we're talking about food that is detached from the ground, once it has a gemar malacha from meiser, so the worker is no longer allowed to eat from it. Kedetanya le'el, as we learned in the brisa earlier, yotza habodel betzmarim v'chulu, to exclude somebody who's separating among the dates. Again, once you have that gemar malacha, it's problematic. And similarly, nispatzchu chaviosav, you have barrels of wine that they become open. Shenitlu magofoseim misachu l'sosman. So the part that was sealed, the lids that were sealed onto the barrel, they came off. And so now he hired someone to close it up. Again, hare'elu lo yochlu, they can't eat the nigmar malachta l'meiser. You have a gemar malacha, the work is completed in terms of the obligation of meiser. V'im lo hodia. Now, if he doesn't let them know, Rashi notes, l'kamon parach, the Gemara later on is going to ask, gabe chavios, maya dinu bay. What does he need to let them know by barrels? It's already obvious there was a gemar malacha. That's the question we left off with, and that's what the Gemara says. Bishlam and isparsu igula vika mekachtos. I understand the mekachtos by the case of the figs. Shekeshomer lehen techila histakru lidros beigulan, because he originally says that I'm hiring you. You should be workers for me in order to press these figs. Sevurim hayu shazu techilas drisasam. They think this is the beginning of that work, the first time that it's happening. V'adayin lo nigmar malachdan. They think there was no gemar malacha. But when it comes to the barrels, meida yadi de itva lemaiser, don't they realize that it's still considered tevel? The mishayard labor haviyayin lemaiser, because when it goes into the pit, when it goes into the vat, already at that point in time, it's considered wine for the obligation of meiser. Now it's already past that stage. It's in the barrels. What difference does it make if it's the first time that they're closing the barrels or the second time? It should not make a difference. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Sheshes says, "Shenispatchu chavyos of labor." The case of the barrels of wine being opened is not simply that they were opened, but they were opened and the wine spilled back into the pit. Now, if the wine spilled back into the pit, so the workers were not aware that there was a gemar malacha, that's why it can be a mekachtos. But the Gemara continues, Vatanya, but didn't we learn in a brayso, yayin misha yorad labor, that wine is considered a gemar malacha from when it descends into the pit? So on the contrary, if it's in the pit, it's still at the point of gemar malacha, and still it should not be considered a mekachtos. And the Gemara answers to that, Rabbi Akiva, we're following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Diyamar misha yikva. Rabbi Akiva says that it's not a gemar malacha until the waste in the wine, essentially the grape skins and the pits, until they float to the top and you start clearing that out. Only at that point in time, according to Rabbi Akiva, it is considered to be a gemar malacha. And Rashi explains, Shenispatchu chavyos of labor. Again, the barrels, they opened up and it spills. Shenishpechu labor, the wine, it pours, it spills into the pit. Usvurin hayu shelo hotziyu misham. They think it was never taken from the pit. Mishayar min hagas l'sochu. They think this is the first time that it went from the area, from the gas, from the winery into the pit. They think it's the first time it's in the pit. That's why they think there's no gemar malacha. And the Gemara says, what do you mean? V'atanya, we learned in a brayso, yayin mishayarad labor, that wine is considered a gemar malacha from when it goes into the pit. Have a gemara l'maiser. That's when it's considered in terms finished in terms of meiser. V'harei yard, and so it still has descended into the pit. So what kind of answer is that? And the Gemara answer to that, misha yikfe. We're following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says it's from when the waste floats to the top of the wine. Misha yikfu hachartzanim al pi habor. It's when the pits that are in the wine, they float up to the top. Kashamascha lios toses v'nodlin hazagin umashlicha. Now you start taking those pits and those skins and you start throwing them out. It's only at that point in time, according to Rabbi Akiva, that it's a gemar malacha, and that's why over here in this situation they don't realize that already happened. They think there has been no gemar malacha. And the Gemara continues, Da'amru le, they say to him again, Lo havi yadin, and we didn't know, we didn't realize that it was already taken out of the pit and now it went back into the pit. But the Gemara still says, V'nei malahu, but why don't we say to them as follows? Iboy lechu asukei adataychu dilma mikveh. Maybe it should have occurred to you that maybe already the waste had floated to the top. Meaning to say, if you're hired to draw the wine out of the pit, they don't know whether we're at the stage where the waste has been cleared out, it floated to the top or not. They don't know what stage they're at, and it's certainly possible there was a gemar malacha. So shouldn't they have entertained the possibility that there was a gemar malacha? Why are they able to say this is a mekachtos? We thought there was no gemar malacha, when you have wine in a pit, it could really go both ways. And the Gemara says, no, Biasra, in this particular place, this is a place where it would not go both ways. Because it's actually the person who's hired to draw it out of the pit is the same person who is clearing the waste that's floated to the top. And so therefore, when they're hired, the assumption really is that there was no gemar malacha. That's why it could be a mekachtos. And the Gemara continues, V'hashda datani Rav Zavid. Now that Rav Zavid taught b'divei Rav Hoshia, in the yeshiva of Rav Hoshia, he taught as follows. Yayin, the way he understood the machlokas in terms of gemar malacha by yayin. So with the machlokas is as follows. Yayin mishiyarad labor v'yikveh. The first opinion is actually wine when it goes into the pit and you're clearing the waste that floated at the top. That's the first opinion when there's a gemar malacha. For Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Akiva says mishayishla bechavyas, it's only a gemar malacha when they actually drain the waste from the barrels. They would pour the wine into the barrels and drain the waste from the barrels. So now, according to that version of the machlokas in terms of a gemar malacha by wine, so then you can say afilu tema shalonis batchu chavyos of labor. You can even say we're talking about a case where the barrels were not opened up, the wine didn't spill into the pit, but the wine actually is still in the barrels. And in this situation as well, they think there was a gemar malacha. The Yamrulei, they say to him, Lo hava yadin on demishli. We did not realize, we did not know that the waste was drained from these barrels. And again, the Gemara asks, still, v'nei but still, we can say to them, it should have occurred to you, Dilma Mishli, that maybe the waste was drained from the barrel, so if it's sitting there in the barrels, it could really go both ways. And the Gemara says, no, again, Ba'asra Dahu Desharik Ahu Mishli. We're talking about in a place where the workers who are hired to close up the barrels, those are the same workers that drain, so their assumption was that there was no Gemar Malacha yet. That's again according to this version of the Machlokes, where Rabbi Akiva says it's not a Gemar Malacha even in the barrels until the waste is drained. That's how we can explain this Mishnah. And Rashi explains, the Amrulei, they can say to him, Lo Havina Yadin de Mikvi, we didn't know, again, that this wine in the pit, that the waste had already floated to the top and it was taken. So then we say, no, maybe it should have occurred to you that it's true. When I said to you that I'm hiring you to draw it from the pit, it should have occurred to you that maybe there was a Gemar Malacha, and since you accepted it, obviously you accepted it even if there was a Gemar Malacha, and the Gemara says, no, this is the place where hu denaged hamoshchem and abor, meaning the person who takes it from the pit is the one that clears the waste as well. That's why this did not occur to them. And the Gemara said a similar thing in terms of the alternate opinion of Rabbi Akiva, Misha Yishla Bechavios, according to that version of Rabbi Akiva, it's when you drain the waste from the barrels, Misha Nasan Bechavios. They put the wine in the barrels, Vutoses, Resichaso, Olo, Mixa, Shemorin, Kofin Lamali. You have some sediments that come up in the barrel, Vakodim Shegofo, Osan Chavios, before you seal those barrels, Sholan, Osan, Resichos, Umashlichan, you draw out that waste. And Rashi continues, the Gemara then says, maybe they thought initially, they thought that it was already drained, Kvarni Sholu, Resichosa, Mimenu Lachutz, whatever came up to the top was already drained to the outside. And the Gemara said again, we're talking in a place where the sharik has sosma b'megufos, the people who are sealing the lids of the barrels onto the barrels, those are the people who usually drain it, and that's why they thought that there was no Gemar Malacha. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, proof again from the Mishnah coming up. The Mishnah says, Kotzetz Adam al Yedei Atzmo. Rashi explains, Kotzetz litol mos v'lo yochal. The person can set as part of his wages that instead of eating the food that I'm normally entitled to eat as a worker, instead of that, I want to take money instead. A person is allowed to do that. And furthermore, al Yedei Beno Bito Hagadolim, the person is allowed to do that through his son and his daughter who are adults. And al Yedei Avdo v'Shivchas Hagadolim, he could also do it, let's say he has an Eved and a Shivcha and they're adults. If they're working and they're entitled to food, he can say that instead of the food, I would like money, I would like wages. V'al Yedei Ishto, and also, let's say his wife is the one working, Mevnei Sheyesh Behen Das, because all of these individuals, they have das, they have understanding. Avaleno Kotzitz, but he's not allowed to do this. He can't say that the food they're supposed to get, he wants that to be wages that he will take. He can't do that. Lo al Yedei Beno Vito HaKatanim, he can't do that if his son and daughter that are minors are doing the work. V'lo al Yedei Avdo v'Shivchas HaKatanim, or let's say it's his slaves or his maidservants that are minors. V'lo al Yedei Behem, and also not with his animal. He can't say that the food the animal was going to eat, instead I want that to be wages, because they don't have understanding. Essentially, they're not able to forgive the food they're entitled to. And Rashi explains, Al Yedei Atzmo, he can do that for himself, B'shvil Atzmo, again for himself, he'll take money instead of food, and he can do it for any of these adults because they have understanding, V'yodi v'kamachli, they know what's going on, and they're able to be mochel. And so the Gemara continues, Kasal Kadaitach, right now we think that the understanding in the Mishnah is, that the arrangement with all of these individuals, his children, his slaves, the arrangement is that he provides them with mizonos, he provides them with food in general, and then he's entitled to all of their wages. That's how it works. And so the Gemara says, if you're going to say that a worker, he's eating mishel shamayim, it's like a gift from the Torah, so misham hachi eino kotze. So then it makes sense to say that when you're talking about, let's say, his son and daughter, or the avodim that are minors, he's not able to say that we're exchanging the food for wages. But if you're going to say that a worker in general, the food that he takes is considered part of his wages, and so really the wages of these people really go to the balabayas because he provides them with mizonos, so then ketanim nami nekutzlu. So when it comes to minors also, let him say that instead of the food that they're supposed to take, I want to take it as wages, because I'm essentially entitled to their wages, and the food is really a form of wages. And the Gemara continues, right now we think that the case over here is, when we're talking about the avodim that are minors, he provides food for these avodim, and the halacha is that if he provides food for the avodim, he's entitled to their wages. So right now we think that's what we're talking about in the Mishnah. We're talking about an arrangement where he's providing food for these avodim that are ketanim, and he's entitled to their wages, and we're saying if they're avodim that are gedolim, so then he can say that I want wages instead of the food that they're entitled to, but if they're minors, he can't say that. And so the Gemara says, if you're going to say that a worker in general is getting food as a gift, mishel shamayim, so misham hachi eno kotzes. So for that reason, the owner is not allowed to say that I want to take wages, I want to take money instead of the food that these avadim are supposed to get. That makes sense because it's a gift mishel shamayim that goes to these workers, and the owner has no right to it. But if you're going to say that the food that the worker is taking is really mishalo, meaning it's really part of the wages of the worker, and all the wages of the worker really go to the owner in this case, because the owner is providing them with food. So katanim nami nekatzlu. So when it comes to minors, let's say slaves that are minors also, he should be able to say, instead of the food that they're entitled to as a worker, which is really part of their wages, since I get their wages anyway, let's set a certain value to that, and I will take money. Why should he not be able to do that if the food is considered to be wages? And Rashi explains, again, we're talking in a scenario where he's providing them with food and all of their wages go to him. So if you're going to say that the worker gets the food mishal shamayim, so now he can't take that as wages. He's not allowed to take the wages by his servants that are minors, because really that worker who's a minor, he doesn't really have any rights. It's not like his wages. It's just the food that he puts in his mouth. He's entitled to that food. It's a gift mishal shamayim. But if you're going to say that the worker is really getting mishalo, the tosefes charu, it's just additional wages, so amayino kotes, why can't he say that those wages go to me as well? Just like the regular wages go to the master, so too the food that was supposed to go to them, which is also a form of wages. If you say mishalohu ochel, that also should go to the master. And so the Gemara continues, and here in the Mishnah, what are we talking about? We're actually talking about a situation where he is not providing food for the avodim, and if he's not providing the food for the avodim, so then essentially he's not entitled to their wages. And Rashi says, She'ein ma'ala lehen mezonos, he doesn't give them mezonos, v'af secharon eino shalo, and so therefore he doesn't get their wages. And Rashi continues, right now we think, a master is not able to say to a slave, you work for me and I'll get your wages and I won't provide for you. And so therefore, in this case, if he's not providing for them mizonos, again, he's not entitled to their wages. This is a machlokas and Meseches Gittin. Now, when it comes to his animal, again, he was trying to make the same arrangement for his animal and say, instead of the food being provided to the animal, I want wages. That's mishum lav de chasima. That's because of the lav of chasima. There's a prohibition against muzzling the animal, and therefore shafilahu atzmo dashba. Let's say it was his animal and he was doing his own work and he was threshing with the animal. Disha shalo, he was doing his own threshing. Eino rashay lechosma, he's not allowed to muzzle the animal, and so therefore that's why when it comes to the animal, it's the same basic idea. The animal is essentially entitled to the food because the animal cannot be muzzled, and therefore he cannot exchange the food for wages in that case as well. But the Gemara continues, if so, that he's not providing food to these slaves, he's not providing food to the avodim, so gedolim nami. So by the adult slaves as well, he's not entitled to their wages. So why is he allowed in that case to say that I want the food instead to be paid as wages to me? And the Gemara says to that, gedolim yadi v'kamachli. When it comes to the adults, so it's true, he's not really entitled to their wages, but if they know that arrangement ahead of time, so then they can be mochel. And so in this particular situation, he's saying, I want that food to be converted into wages, into money, and as long as they know about it and they're able to be mochel, that will be effective. And we will take a look at Tosas over here. If so, gedolim nami, when it comes to the adults as well, meaning if he's not providing them mizonos, why is he allowed to take the food that they're entitled to as workers? Why can he take that as wages? And Tosas explain, if you're going to say that the owner over here is supporting the slaves, he's giving them mizonos, and the worker in general takes food mishel shamayim, so then asi shaper, then it comes out okay. The kotzets begedolim, he's allowed to be kotzets by gedolim, he can say he'll take wages instead of the food that they're supposed to get. The kavan, the zanosam machli b'leiv shalom, since he supports them, they are mochel, they forgive that b'leiv shalom, they forgive that fully. Elo yamer b'shein mala lehen mizonos, but if you're saying that he's not even supporting these adult slaves, amai kotzets legedolim, why is he allowed to make this arrangement with the adult slaves? They ain't misratzin b'leiv shalom, they don't fully agree to this. Kavan sheno zanosam, because he's not even supporting them. Ela miyirahenosim vanusim hein, rather they're doing this out of fear, they're essentially coerced. Umeshani, into that the Gemara answers, gedolim, when it comes to adults, afilu kashein Mizan, even when he doesn't support them, Machli B'leiv Shalem, they are fully forgiving it. Essentially, they are doing it B'leiv Shalem, and therefore this is allowed. But the Gemara continues, Vatan Rav Oshia, Badin Rav Oshia teach in a brisa. This is essentially going to be an alternate version of the upcoming Mishnah that we just quoted. Kotzitz Adam al Yedei Atzmo Val Yedei Ishto. A person is allowed to make this arrangement, converting the food that he's entitled to as a worker into wages. He can do this for himself, for his wife, Aval Lo al Yedei Behemto, but he can't do this for his animal. Val Yedei Beno Vito HaGadolim, Aval Lo al Yedei Beno Vito HaKatanim. He can do this for his adult children, but not for his minor children. And here's the difference. V'kotzitz al Yedei Avdo v'shivchasu HaKananim. He can do this for his Eved Kanani, for his Shivcha Kanani. He can make this arrangement Bein Gedolim uvein Katanim. He can do this whether they are adult slaves or whether they are minor slaves. And so the distinction over here, the argument over here between this brisa and the Mishnah is by minor slaves. According to the brisa of Rav Oshia that we just learned, even if they are minor slaves, you're allowed to make this arrangement. According to the Mishnah, you are not. And so the Gemara says, My lav is it not? Idi v'idi b'malu lehen mezonos. The case in both the Mishnah and the brisa, we're talking where the owner is giving mezonos to the slaves. And this is exactly the machlokas. Demar savar mishalohu ochel, that one holds that mishalohu ochel, that essentially the food that's being eaten by a worker is wages, and since the owner is providing mezonos to the avodim, even by the avodim ketanim, according to the brisa of Rav Oshia, but since he's already providing food, he's entitled to the wages of these avodim, and therefore the food, which is really mishalohu ochel, the food which is a kind of wages, the owner is entitled to. That would be the brisa that says mishalohu ochel. Umar savar mishal shamayim hu ochel, and then the other one, meaning to say the Mishnah holds that the Eved is entitled Mishal Shamayim, and since the Eved is entitled Mishal Shamayim, so it's not really wages, the owner can't make this arrangement when it comes to Avodim who are Ketanim, who don't have any das, they don't have the ability to be Mochel. And the Gemara says not necessarily, Lo no Dekuli Alma Mishalohu Ochel. It could be that everybody agrees Mishalohu Ochel. Now again, Mishalohu Ochel, if the owner is providing mizonos, so then really the owner should be able to say that he gets the wages of these workers, but that's exactly the issue. V'lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan b'shein malo lehen mizonos. In the case of the Mishnah, we're talking where he's not providing any mizonos. So since he's not providing any mizonos, as we said, he's not entitled to the wages. That's why he can't make this arrangement when they're katanim. Uvraisa b'malo lehen mizonos. But the Bryce is talking where he is giving them mizonos, he's entitled to their wages. That's why he's allowed to make this arrangement. But the Gemara continues, b'mayu kimta b'malo lehen mizonos. But how could you say that in the Bryce we're talking where he's providing for them mizonos? Ihachi, if so, if he's providing for them mizonos, katanim nami nokitz lahu. When it comes to the katanim as well, he should be able to make this arrangement, meaning to say, when it comes to the katanim, let's say his children that are katanim, if he's providing for them mizonos, why can't he make this arrangement with his children? And the Gemara says to that, Sa'arayu devno vito hakatanim, the pain of his son and his daughter, the pain of his children who are minors, lo zachi le'rachmana, that the Torah did not entitle him to. Meaning to say, if he's providing mizonos, let's say according to the Brisa, if he's providing mizonos to the slaves that are minors, so there, yes, he's entitled to their wages, he can make that arrangement. But just because he's providing mizonos to his children that are minors, that does not mean that he can make such an arrangement with his children. And Rashi explains, Vatani Rav Oshia, didn't Rav Oshia teach, Kotzitz Adam al Yedei Atzmo val Yedei Ishto aval lo al Yedei Behemto, he can make such an arrangement with his own work, with his wife's work, but not his animal, Mishum Chasima, because there already it's a problem of muzzling the animal. The Kotzitz al Yedei Bonav HaGedolim aval lo HaKatanim, you can do it with the adult children, not the minor children. The Kotzitz al Yedei Shivchaso va'avdo, and he can do it with his slaves, whether they are adults or minors. Kasha avodim katanim demas nisan. The point here was a contradiction in terms of minors who are slaves, and the Gemara then says, Idi v'idi masnisin u'braisa, both the Mishnah and the Braisa. Initially, the Gemara says that both the Mishnah and the Braisa agree that he's giving them mizonos. And Rashi continues, Demar savar tana de masnisin, that one holds, meaning the Tana of our Mishnah holds, Mishal Shamayim hu ochel, that the worker is getting Mishal Shamayim, Hilkach leslu l'marayu zechia b'achilas, and that's why, according to the Mishnah, the owner of the minor slaves has no merit in what they're entitled to eat. Ta'afilu shalahen eina ad she'idnen l'fin, even it's not really even theirs until they put it into their mouths. And then the Gemara said that really it could be everybody agrees, Mishalo, that the worker is eating from his own, it's considered to be part of his wages, and the difference between the Mishnah and the Braisa is whether he's providing for the mizonos. According to the Braisa, he's providing for the mizonos, that's why he's entitled even by the minor slaves. But then the Gemara said, Ihachi, if so, Beno Bito Nami Nokatzlu, when it comes to his son and his daughter who are minors, why can't he have the same arrangement? And the Gemara said, Sa'arayu, when it comes to the pain of his son and daughters who are minors, that he has no merit in. But the Gemara continues, "B'mayu kimtan lemasnisin b'shein malalahen mezonos." But how can you say that our Mishnah is talking about a situation where he's not providing for them food, he's not entitled to their wages? And Rashi says, "B'mayu kimta uliolam mishalahu ochel." You're saying that according to the Mishnah, really the food that the worker is taking is essentially from his own. It's considered part of his wages. Umishum de'eno malin. It's because he's not providing mezonos. Kamar lo yikotz. That's why when it comes to these slaves that are minors, he's not allowed to make this arrangement. How can you say that? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph.